You're listening to the Really Serious History Podcast. I am, of course, your host, as always, Benjamin von Luxembourg, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague, a very professional, very, very worldly, very wise man. He's the Duchess of Windsor, and he's also the chair of philosophy, PhD, DIC, CHI. Deven Kay, thank you for joining us, sir.
It's always good to be here with you, Jared. It's always good. Thanks for having me. I'm also Grand Poobah of the Water Buffalo Lodge in Boston. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, just quite a resume, and we're just so happy to have you here to talk about history very seriously here on the Serious History Podcast. I just wanted to ask you, have you uncovered any very academic history facts lately?
Yes, so like one uncontested fact, which I find very interesting. So this is during the French Revolution, right? When they stormed the Bastille. So obviously there's a guy in charge of the Bastille, you know, the fucking Marquis of what's-his-foo-foo or whatever.
Hey, this is the Serious History Podcast. You can't...
Well, I don't remember his name. I'm sorry.
Profanity.
But anyways, they storm the Bastille and take him hostage and take a couple of hours to decide what to do with him. Eventually, he gets tired of waiting for them to decide, so he kicked the leader in the balls. And then they cut his head off and paraded it through the streets of Paris. True fact.
I've heard that it is a true fact. It's not great for the Serious History Podcast, but luckily,
there's nothing more serious than having your head cut off for kicking a man in the balls.
I suppose so. That's pretty true. It's about as serious as it gets, man. I've been in some pretty serious situations, but this isn't the Serious History Podcast. This is the Photography Friends Podcast. I am your photographer, Jared Poirier, and we are going to do a little bit of a history episode, the second part of our series on JFK. We're going to be talking about the man himself, JFK. And I am joined, of course, by Deven Kay. Tell us a little bit about your week, Deven. How are things going for you, my friend?
Well, things have been pretty quiet. You know, I spent the week at the camp. I did a lot of reading, obviously,
Nice.
on JFK.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a real deep dive into Tolkien.
Oh, cool, man. Yeah, I've been
A lot
learning.
like reading her history.
Yeah, it is kind of it is a little bit like history, just with more dragons than actual
Yeah,
history.
exactly.
Actual history has a disappointing few dragons, you know.
Yeah, like a total of 0 total dragons, which is, well, unless you believe, like, because I think Chinese legend talks about dragons, but I mean, like,
Sure.
Actually, no, I mean, if you consider Komodo dragons, then history has quite a lot of dragons.
Oh yeah, that's true. Not a lot of significant dragons. But anyways,
No,
we're not
they
here
don't
to
fly out.
we're not here to talk about dragons. We're going to talk about JFK. But before we can do that, I just want to thank our gracious sponsor, which is of course CloudSpot, the easiest way for photographers to deliver and sell their photos online. You can experience beautiful galleries, grandma-proof image downloads, and custom storefronts for sales. You guys know the drill from last week's episode. If you listened, the deal's just gotten sweeter. It's actually 50% off now for the first 12 months. All you got to do is click that link in the description. What sources do we have for this one, man? Let's talk sources.
So I've been reading a book called The House of Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
I also was reading the same book that you did.
The Delic, Robert Delic.
Yeah.
Cool. You got your hands on that one, the unfinished.
Yeah,
life?
yeah, I got them both at the library actually. The whole time you were telling me about it, I was able to go and look at the book and check it.
And how are you feeling about Karl Marx since you went to the library? Now you love him, right?
Yeah, and honestly, the more I go to the library, the more socialist I become. It's crazy. It's either propaganda or there's some kind of correlation between education and political views. I don't know.
Well, there is something inherently socialist about the librage, right? Like
I suppose so.
Technically, you should be pulling yourself up by your own book straps.
I guess so, but they've been around for so long. I have to assume that society's always seen clear benefit in the investment.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there was that one really famous one that got burned down, right? The library in Alexandria or whatever. But we're not going to talk about that at all. Yeah. So there's that the great book Unfinished Life, Robert Dallek, and I also listened to a really nice lecture. I mean, I listened to a bunch of stuff and I read a bunch of stuff too, but I do want to highlight this one. Gresham College. This nice lecture on Kennedy by Vernon Bogdanor. So good luck with that name. But you can actually just find that right there on the Gresham College website, and you can watch that whole lecture, and it's pretty cool. Yeah.
One of the things about the Kennedys is that there's such a point of interest for so many people that there's no shortage of writings about them, right? Like when I went to the library, there was an entire shelf just for JFK himself.
Wow. Yeah. The library here had quite a few JFK books, and you can get into any part of the topic that you want. There's so many different areas that you can kind of spin off in. If you're just purely like, a real sicko and you just want to focus on the actual like head explosion part, you can do that all day. If you're like us and you're more interested in the actual history, then you can do that as well, right? One of the things that I learned at the library was that Kennedy was only in office as the president of the United States of America for 1,036 days. And yet he is consistently ranked among the top 5 U.S. presidents in history. And if you're looking at post-war, he might be the top. He's the youngest.
Not really a great group.
Not a great bunch. He was the youngest elected president at 43, I believe. The only younger president was Roosevelt, but he, I guess, became president by being vice president or something like that, right?
Yeah, his president died in office.
Yeah, the phrase that I really like that I think sums up Kennedy well is one that he actually used to describe himself. He described himself as an idealist without illusions, which I think is a really good way of describing him. And
everybody wants to think that they're kind of a pragmatist, right?
That's true. Yeah, everyone just wants to think that whatever crazy stuff they believe is right.
Yeah, but at the same time, I kind of agree with the statement. I think Kennedy probably understood politics and people well enough to know that sometimes idealistic ends are not always achieved through the nicest means.
Yeah,
he knew how to play the game. He knew what he was doing.
That's true. He did, and we'll definitely uncover that, is that he did play the political game, and you can take from that. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, right? I guess any type of pragmatism, there's going to be some consequences to that. I really like this phrase. This really popped up, especially since we are going to talk a lot about Kennedy's foreign policy, dealings with Russia and Cuba. I really think that kind of was the most important thing that he did in his presidency. I would actually argue that, I think. And I believe that we'll probably both agree on that. I really like this phrase here from Dallek here, describing Kennedy basically summing up his opinions on foreign policy. And he's talking really about, I think, assassinations here, but I think it does apply to interventions, assassinations, any type of war really that you're doing. He said that it has these interventions have unintended consequences at home and abroad, and I think that as we go into the history, we're really going to realize that's true, and in Kennedy's time and in our time as well, right? That any chess piece that you move on the board, playing the game of international politics, that you can't say before you move it what the actual consequences are going to be, right? And I think that Kennedy was someone who understood that well.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody who understood the idea of moving carefully.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, there's the Bay of Pigs. But other than that, I'd say his record speaks to it.
Well, I mean, we'll get into that too, but I actually think that maybe it was because of the Bay of Pigs, that being like I don't know. People call it a fiasco. Maybe we can call it a fuck up on this podcast. But
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
it's because
exactly.
he fucked up so bad that he came back and possibly saved the world with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So
Yeah, I'd say that definitely could have played a factor. It's certainly, you'd hope it would be something he would learn from.
yeah, yeah. All that to say that Kennedy is one of the greatest presidents, and there's a reason. I think truly, there's a
He's
reason for it.
perceived as one of the greatest presidents, right? These are all lists that are, they're either voted on by historians or like
Just the
specifically
public.
presidential historians or the public, right? So like, who what would make somebody the greatest president ever? How would you gauge that? And even though I love Kennedy, how could you definitely say that when he had less than a term?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it when we get
Okay.
that is the thing, but we'll talk about that as we get into this episode, and we'll get into
Okay.
some details
I'm
of
sorry to jump
Kennedy's
your
life.
gun.
No, it's all good. We'll decide by the end. Is he that'll be a good way to frame this episode. We'll decide by the end what it actually means to be a great leader, and if he was one. I think that some things, just kind of high level things that really stood out to me about Kennedy, reading about his life and his presidency, he was incredibly ambitious. He was incredibly in touch with people as well. I think that now the very common phrase that's associated with politicians is that they're out of touch, right? He was somebody who really had his finger on the pulse of the country and what people are thinking. I think that he was proactive. I think that he thought ahead. He was often ahead of the game. He was often thinking, to go back to that chess analogy, like 3 moves ahead, right?
Yeah.
He had one of the, like you said, one of the shortest presidencies, but also one of the most impactful presidencies and one of the highest stakes presidencies, right? In his short time in office, he's dealing with everything from, nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union to, Cuba, Vietnam, all of these things that are in play, and also to kind of bring them all together with the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? As we talked about, the closest that we've ever come to a full-on nuclear war, other than what we mentioned already, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. I mean, we shouldn't forget those guys would be pretty mad if we said, oh, there's never been a nuclear war, because, for obvious reasons. And one big thing, this is weird to think now, but really he was an outsider. He was the Barack Obama of his time in terms of the type of people who had been president before, because he was Irish, because he was Catholic, because he was,
And nobody saw him coming, right? His political career happened so fast.
And I think there's actually supposed to be an O on the top of that name. I think that they changed the name from O. Kennedy to Kennedy, I'm pretty sure.
I did not know that, but I believe it.
Yeah, pretty nuts. So
Those liars.
those liars were stopping the episode.
I'll be in my trailer.
Yeah. You have a trailer?
No, not anymore.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
Do you know anything? So let's talk about this guy's life, man. Do you know anything about his time in the Navy?
I know a little bit about his time in the Navy. I know that he was in command of a PT boat as a lieutenant. Like a PT boat in World War II would have been like a really, really fast, small boat with like a couple machine guns on it.
And missiles as well, torpedoes. Yeah.
Okay. I want to say he might have been hurt in action once, but I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah, I can tell you this story.
Okay.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. These PT boats, basically the idea was that they would have torpedoes on the boats, and then they would get up to these Japanese destroyers, which are huge battleships, right? And the whole point of these torpedo boats was to just get as close to the destroyers as you can, and then launch these torpedoes, and you could actually sink a destroyer, right? So it's pretty crazy. You're taking down a ship with hundreds of people on it with this little thing that has a crew of 12 people. So that was kind of the idea. Kennedy was the commander of PT 109, and he was, you're right, injured in action. His torpedo boat was rammed by a Japanese destroyer, and him and the entire crew, other than the two, I think 2 of them died, and then the rest of them had to endure a 3-mile swim, and combined with some other swimming around to different islands. And this is where Kennedy actually like one of the first incredibly heroic things that he does. He actually saved this guy, Pappy McMaffin, I think is his name, which is a hilarious fucking name. Kennedy was swimming, holding Pappy, holding his life jacket in his teeth, and actually saved this guy's life.
Jesus.
Yeah, and they were on these islands. You're not out of the woods just because you got away from that destroyer. The Japanese army was looking for these guys. They wanted to take them out. And Kennedy actually wrote a message, carved it into a coconut. And there's these two guys. So if it wasn't for these guys, Bayukyu Gasa and Aroni Kumana, you wouldn't ever have heard the name John F. Kennedy. So these guys saved his life. They actually brought that message to the American command, and then the American Navy came and rescued everybody.
Oh, shit. That's cool.
And it's nuts that, like, this is how you know that this dude had a crazy life, right? Is like, this would be like the story of anyone else's life.
Yeah,
but this is just like
another day.
It's a footnote for his life, right? But you're definitely seeing some things that will emerge later on in his career, like obviously that bravery, taking command of like a boat, and also the fact, I think that this is really important, that he actually wanted a small boat, right? He would rather have the autonomy and the ability to do shit of like the smaller boat rather than serving on like a huge vessel where you don't just immediately affect the world by what you're doing, right? I think that's really important to draw out. I think that that's going to come out. Do you know any stuff about like his congressional career, Congress, Senate?
I know that I think he had one term as a congressman, and then he moved on to a Senate seat. And I don't remember how long he held it. Interestingly enough, when I studied him, I did a lot more reading about his childhood illness and stuff like that. That was actually what I got drawn to.
Well, do you want to talk about that before we get further into this?
Well, why don't you talk about the congressional stuff first? And then we'll go
there's really not much to talk about. I mean, his congressional, everybody kind of agrees that his time in Congress was not particularly impressive.
Yeah.
And in the Senate as well. And
they were stepping stones.
Yeah, I get the sense that he wasn't really. It goes back to exactly what I just said, right? That small boat thing. He's like, I'd rather be the boss of this little vessel that can do something huge than just be lost in the Senate or whatever, right? I think he always wanted more autonomy. He wanted more power, and just being a senator, being a congressman wasn't enough for him. I get that sense that he was like way more ambitious than that, right?
Not able to affect things in the way that he saw fit.
Yeah. But he doesn't do a great job, I don't think, of, he's not an effective, not an effective politician really here. You see him capitulating to radical racists in order to, get the bills that he needs in order to get, win the elections that he needs to win. And one big thing is a failure to oppose McCarthyism, a failure to oppose Joe McCarthy, which you can inform the people about if you want, like all that McCarthyism stuff.
So McCarthyism refers to a period in American history where Joe McCarthy, a particular politician, essentially created a state-backed witch hunt to find people who they identified as communist and socialist and to out them. And I mean, a lot of people lost their livelihoods, lost their careers, lost a lot over this. Some went to prison. And more than that, a lot of it was a lot of trumped up charges, and eventually it came to a point where it seemed more like it was Joe McCarthy's enemies than anything else. Eventually, Joe McCarthy himself was outed for some sort of political indiscretion. I can't remember, and I think the era of McCarthyism ended just like that, basically in a day. Yeah,
and Kennedy had the chance to really stand up to this guy, to make it known that he wasn't supporting that type of stuff, and for the reasons of political expediency, exactly the same reason why he chose Lyndon B. Johnson, right, LBJ, as his VP, right?
Yeah, well, it was a means to an end, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think that initially LBJ would seem like the less harmful means to an end here.
Mm.
What I'll say about opposing McCarthyism is that it was actually dangerous.
Oh yeah, for
Like,
sure it
forget
was.
political expediency. If you opposed McCarthyism, you were likely to be branded a socialist,
Mm-hmm.
have your life picked apart with a comb, and then
Mm-hmm.
if there was anything in it vaguely socialist that they could pin on you, then they
Yeah.
would tear you down.
Yeah, I'm not even necessarily like condemning Kennedy here. I'm just kind of pointing out
A
that
failure.
he in the Senate, and in Congress, he seems to just kind of sit there with his hands, like holding his hands together. Like he's just kind of, doing what he needs to do to stay in his seat and kind of not much more than that, right? And yeah, this is a time of, we talked a little bit about the civil rights stuff, and I mentioned the segregated lunch counters and stuff like that, but it's a lot more than that as well. And I kind of want to clarify that, like, it's not just about where you're sitting and eating; it's about like access to education, which universities and colleges, you can get into as African American, right?
Yeah.
And discrimination in hiring as well, like the type of job, literally just like your access to society, like seriously was at stake here. And, Kennedy could have definitely done more, even as president, to address civil rights. I think that this is kind of a failure of his, honestly.
Yeah. And I mean, like, he had so many big foreign policy things that he was doing
Mm-hmm.
at that time. LBJ was much more the kind of domestic laws person. Like, honestly, like, I said that Kennedy would have gotten credit for a lot of the civil rights movement if he had lived, but the truth is most of that really was LBJ. Some of those things were things that he had kind of been pushing for most of his political life.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I think that LBJ actually is
Yeah.
one of Kennedy's major failures. When I've studied Roman history, I've learned that one of the most important things that you can judge a leader by is succession. Some leaders have all of their greatest works torn down by dying and leaving their office to somebody who just isn't competent enough to keep their work going. Or isn't morally fibrous enough in this case. So LBJ, as the president, had access to CIA intelligence. He didn't only know, he listened to tapes of Richard Nixon saying to South and North Vietnamese politicians, if you wait to arrange your peace negotiations until after I become president, I will make sure you get a better deal than you would have under LBJ. That's textbook treason.
Yeah.
Now, LBJ allowed a treasonous man to become president of the United States, and in my mind, that negates almost all of the good work that he had done domestically as far as it being in his favor in any way.
Yeah.
And it also actually negated a lot of good foreign policy work by Kennedy.
Yeah.
So
for
this
sure.
this failure to arrange proper succession himself, and then for his successor to do anything about what he knew, I think did serious harm. I think Nixon was a horrible president.
Oh, yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to argue with you there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some people might, but not me.
It's so it's unfortunately not an intention, but it was the outcome of his choice to choose a politically expedient person to be on his ticket.
Yeah, and if you want to give him credit for the things that he did right, I really think that it's important that we point out the failures as well, right? Because, I do think it's all kind of mingled together. One thing that this is one of the things that I think is indisputable, though. His skills in terms of delivering speeches, as an orator, his ability to inspire people, his ability to come out with these like one-liners that would stick in your head and really they're still talked about today, right? Like some of the most important phrases from history came out of this guy's mouth, right? Like
in that respect, he was Lincoln-esque.
Oh, for sure. Ask
There's
not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. The thing of mankind must put an end to war before war puts an end to mankind.
yeah,
You know, we choose to do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard.
They're hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks a lot to Kennedy's intentions.
hmm
Is that he was somebody who was willing to try to take on the serious problems of the world in his 8 years rather than putting them off for somebody else's.
Yeah. Very true, very true. And I think that you can't really, it seems less important than like an actual policy or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
or a war or something. But I don't know if it is, man. Like the ability to inspire people, the ability to make people want to engage with their country, right? To make people want to engage with society.
That is rare.
It is rare, and I do think that, this has echoes throughout history. So I don't want to, I don't want to denigrate that the importance of that. And one thing, we got to give Jackie credit here too. Kennedy, when he was a senator and stuff like that, he was not great at speeches. People thought that he talked with too high a pitch and he seemed like he was kind of nervous and shit. Isn't that interesting? And Jackie was his vocal coach, and she's the one who kind of told him, like, no, you got to speak, like, slowly, clearly, deeper, things like that.
Everybody has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can remember until I was in, like, grade 9 or grade 10, I was, like deathly afraid of speaking in front of the class. Not that I was afraid to tell anybody off in the right moment, but put me in front of a room formally all of a sudden, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and look at you now. You're a podcast boy.
I'm a podcast boy, seeker of the center of attention in many rooms.
Yeah, true. That is true. I know that because I've partied with you before. Do you want to talk a little bit about his health? You said that you did quite a bit of reading on that. So
Kennedy was partially sold on, being a young man who was still vigorous and had great health, but Kennedy had health problems his entire life. He nearly died of scarlet fever when he was a child. He had serious digestive problems, probably colitis or IBS. He had urinary tract infections, often prostatitis. He had ulcers. He had a terrible spine, back problems that he got playing football in college. And I believe his back problems were severe enough that he was initially rejected when he applied to the Navy.
Well, his dad took care of that.
Oh yeah. It must be nice to have a rich father. I wouldn't know, but
I wouldn't know about it.
He had, I think, 4 back surgeries. The last one in 1957, just a few years before he became president, while he was a senator.
Yeah, this stuff was all covered up, by the way.
Yeah, very much covered up. They didn't want anybody to know this. As I think about it, actually, I think he actually had a back surgery similar to mine, where they fused parts of his spine together with metal.
Crazy, man. Just another way that you're like Kennedy, bro.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Are there ways? Like, how many ways?
There's more ways.
Tell me all the ways.
Your ability to inspire people, Deven.
Really?
Yeah.
I can definitely inspire people to listen and sometimes give me their money, but...
Oh, good.
but I hadn't really tried any grander purpose yet.
Okay, well...
It's good to know, though. I do think about starting a political party. They kind of all suck here.
Yeah, they do kind of all suck, but I don't know if there's a lot of a point in that. Anyways, is it the Addison's disease? Did you mention that? Is that the
I didn't get to that, no, but he did have Addison's disease.
This guy had a lot of problems, man.
Yeah, man. So his back surgeries did not heal well. He had painful abscesses. He had bone infections. Yeah. At one point, he was so sick that he was administered last rites.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, and his back got more hurt from the incident that we talked about earlier in the war with the PT boat.
Yeah, the PT boat probably would have been so bad for his back, all that bouncing around on the water.
No, pulling the dude with his teeth too. and like getting his boat rammed and all
Oh,
that.
yeah, no, that does add some weight to that.
Yeah.
And this is one of those themes that makes him similar to FDR to me. So, I mean, FDR was hiding the outcome of a severe case of polio. People knew that he had a little bit of motion disability, but they didn't know that he couldn't stand on his own or walk more than a few feet. But I think when you look at FDR's life, the hardships of his illness and the length of them too prepared him to not be so put off by the hardships of being president. I think that probably when you've been dealing with serious health problems for that long, it's hard for things to get you down in that way, and it probably played a part in why FDR was able to inspire people as well. And I think that might be similar in Kennedy, that the hardships of his illness, they prepared and hardened him for what was coming for him.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of people would say, "Oh, we need to have a healthy president. Like it's so important that the president not be somebody with all these health problems." But Kennedy was this guy who was just so confident that he should be the president, right? That he was the guy to be making these decisions. He was the guy to represent the people, right? And
I don't think there was anyone better.
No, I don't
Not
think
at
so
the time.
either. Yeah, I don't think so either. And I also get the sense that with all of these like health problems that he kind of had, like, I think he already thought that his life was forfeit in a way. You hear him talk about like expecting to die young, right? With all of these problems. And I guess that if he was going to be sacrificed, like he wanted it to be for the country and for the people, right?
And
like,
I think that if he was going to be in pain, in his mind, his pain might as well have a purpose.
Right.
Do you want to hear a list of drugs he was treated with during his presidency?
Sure. I love lists of drugs.
Lidocaine, Librium, amphetamines including Ritalin, thyroid hormones, barbiturate sleeping pills, gamma globulin to stave off infections, and steroid hormones he needed to keep his adrenal insufficiency at bay.
I mean, that's just a fun Friday
And that's
night.
just some of them. Yeah, that's just a Tuesday cocktail, you know.
I was going to say a Friday night at the club, but that Tuesday tea time. Okay. All right. That's hardcore. Anyways, yeah. So we can get a little bit more into the details of his presidency if you want. Some of the big things.
Sure. So I think one of the early major events of his presidency would have been the Bay of Pigs.
That's what I've got right here, man. April 1961. Now, we touched on the Bay of Pigs in the last episode, but to go into it a little bit more in detail here, and just to talk about how it influenced Kennedy's presidency, like I said, I don't know if he would have been so successful in the Cuban Missile Crisis if he hadn't fucked this part up, right? I think it's kind of this failure that teaches him, and I've like experienced this in my own life, like there's nothing that'll teach you something like fucking up, right?
I think that definitely may have been it. I've kind of always had an alternate theory about this.
Okay, interesting.
And I mean, my theory is kind of counterbalanced by the amount of bad press he got for the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Mm-hmm.
But what better way to get rid of a bunch of radical right-wing Cuban elements in your country?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Put them on the beach and then hang them out to dry.
Yeah. Do you think that's what he tried to do?
It's a tough call. I can see the motive and the opportunity and the means.
Yeah.
But I won't say more than that.
Yeah, well,
that being said, the like I said, the press fallback was so bad that if he did choose to do it that way, it was probably one of the worst choices ever.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like he did this thing so half-hearted. He was like, "Let's do this invasion," but then I'm not going 100%. I'm not going to involve America with air support and stuff like that. And we're going to kind of maintain our deniability here. I think the biggest thing that he learns from this is that you can't trust like the pre-established. Just because the ball's already rolling doesn't mean that you should keep rolling that ball. I think that he realizes that sometimes the president's job is to be that person who stands in the way of all of that stuff. Like these plans, Eisenhower was already working on this. The CIA was already working on this, right?
Yeah.
I do think Kennedy still deserves the blame for the failure, but I think that what he learned by that is you can't trust the experts, and you can't just let like the bureaucratic process just keep driving forward. Your job as the president is to be that advocate for the people, and if that means standing in front of what everybody else says is the right thing to do, then that's what you do. And I think that's what he learns here, and that's why I think it's an important thing to happen, right?
And as the president, all you have to do is have the backbone, excuse me, to do it, because you are the commander-in-chief. You're the decidinator, you know?
The decidinator. Oh man, I wish that you know, we could have foreign presidents and that Arnold Schwarzenegger could have a term just so we could say that, you know.
Vote for me if you want to live.
And his re-election campaign slogan is "I'll be back."
Oh man, that's rich. I love it.
Okay. So let's not get lost in the puns. The Vienna summit is one of the. This is it's time for the photo part of the episode, everybody.
There we go. It's like 30 minutes in and we got there.
We're going to talk about a photograph. So the Vienna summit happened in July 1961, kind of right after the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is where we have this very famous photo of Kennedy and Khrushchev. If you want to have a look at this photo, you can search Kennedy and Khrushchev, and probably Google will have to recorrect your spelling of Khrushchev because the guy's name is really freaking weird to spell. But if you search that, you'll find this cool photo of these two gentlemen sitting together. Deven, you've got the photo in front of you.
There you are. So they're sitting together in these kind of very chintzy looking lounge chairs, and there's a couch behind them.
They look like your grandma's chairs.
They do look like, yeah, like somebody's grandma's chairs. And Khrushchev is sitting forward with his hands on his knees, and Kennedy's kind of got his hand out, and you can see that they're right in the middle of talking. What you're seeing here is the establishment of a relationship which later is going to save the world from destroying itself.
Yeah, straight up.
It's a joke, but it's not, you know, like later on it's the basis of whatever basis of trust they form here that's going to stop that.
Yeah,
because it came down to them in the end.
It's so interesting to just, when you're staring at the photo, like look at the body language of these two guys, right?
It says a lot about them, I think.
Yeah, Khrushchev he seems like it's interesting what you said earlier too, that he has kind of like a youthfulness about him. He seems like like when I look at this, he is like a giddy kid, like he's excited to be speaking to Kennedy. Do you see that, or am I crazy?
I see it. I think that what you're seeing is, so some people really enjoy vigorous debate. Some people need it. I mean, hell, you and I have walked down streets in Toronto in the middle of the night yelling at each other for like 45 minutes. Not really yelling out of anger, just yelling because we're loud.
Passion.
Yeah, alcohol. Exactly. And I think that's what you see out of Khrushchev and Kennedy. I mean, on the one hand, I always felt like Kennedy had this kind of attitude, that Khrushchev had this attitude towards Kennedy, which was kind of like, you know, this young guy isn't going to come in here and tell me how things are and what they are. But at the same time, I think that he probably was the sort of man who really would have enjoyed the kind of vigorous debate that he would have gotten out of John Kennedy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And some of the stuff that they were debating about, obviously, there's the situation in Berlin, which we haven't even talked about. That there's so many things going on that we literally didn't say Berlin until right now.
Yeah. So there's the Berlin airlift was pretty early in Kennedy's presidency too, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, man.
And so people are basically like just wholesale flooding out of East Germany and into West Germany, because honestly conditions there are better and there's work and you have access to nice capitalist products, you know, that you can buy for yourself and stuff like that. So Berlin being completely surrounded by the Soviet area of Germany, interestingly enough, eventually the Soviets cut it off. Not only are people not allowed to move back and forth, but goods are no longer allowed to move back and forth either. And so all of the, well, I can't say that the needs were completely met, but I can't even say, but an unbelievable amount of supplies, everything that Berlin would have needed to stay going, water, food, toilet paper, all of it, suddenly was being brought in on pretty much any plane they could get. And eventually the negative press from this broke, and the Soviets allowed products to flow in again. But I think this was around the time that the Berlin Wall started to go up, and that separation happened.
Yeah, so this is
it's a time of tension.
Yeah, oh yeah, and this is a big sticking point, and connected to so many things with Europe, the European international politics, and that
Which
also
was super tense.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Obviously, the Bay of Pigs just happening. That was something. There's the situation in Laos, and increasingly a situation in Vietnam. Just all these different areas, as Cuba as well, where Khrushchev and Kennedy should be kind of at each other's throats, right? In a way. And it's interesting here that they're sitting down, they're talking things out.
Well, and I think their states would have liked to, or people in their states would like to have driven them towards being at each other's throats.
Oh,
but I think
sure.
What you see here, honestly, is just two good politicians who, I think, kind of like you said earlier, weren't just willing to allow the balls to roll because people wanted them to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's definitely people on both sides that consider, the other side to be a snake in the grass, and that you shouldn't be dealing with them.
There were people in Kennedy's cabinet who, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, were saying, if we're going to strike, we should strike now,
right,
while we have the superior tactical position.
Oh, yeah. You got to nuke China, too, while you're at it.
Fuck it. Why not? Nuke the whales, bro.
Nuke the whales. Wow. Yeah, the kind of outcome of this, it's interesting, the different takeaways. Kennedy thought that he performed horribly. He thought that Khrushchev had absolutely demolished him. And Khrushchev actually was just like, it was nice to meet him. I think he's an all right guy. I think we'll be able to work things out. So it's interesting how they walk away from it kind of with a different view. Maybe that's a cultural thing. Maybe that's Khrushchev having more experience, being a bit older. I'm not sure, but yeah. But as you were saying, the most important takeaway here is that these are the two guys who, through history, through fate, through whatever you want to call it, they had their fingers on the buttons that could end the world. And that's pretty crazy to see a photo of these two guys and know that is the context of what we're dealing with. Okay, so we are, the next thing that we should probably talk about is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which took place in 1963. Again, we kind of gave the broad strokes of this. I think that we actually got one part of this a little bit wrong, but the overall thing we definitely had right, which was the standoff over missiles, nuclear missiles that were located inside of Cuba, and obviously the American government not being super pleased with that. Because they could destroy America with those missiles, and the blockade and that we talked about. I think that Deven, you mentioned that this was a week, and what I could find was that it was 13 days. So that's the one thing that I think we screwed up, but everything else I think we were spot on.
Yeah, it was a really tense period where basically, we established the historical context, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it was for that 13 days, it was basically 24/7 in the Situation Room dealing with the problem. I assume they had sleep, but, for that 13 days, everything that they did all day, every day was this Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
The blockade and the tension that went along with it all.
Yeah, and to put, just to give a little bit of context, and then this is something that I actually looked up, so it's kind of fascinating to me to learn this stuff. Let's just talk about nuclear weapons for a second here. I mentioned that there's never been a full-scale nuclear war. That's true. The only time that it was ever used was at the end of World War II in order to get the Japanese to surrender. The bombing of Hiroshima, followed by the bombing of Nagasaki, and these are like very by today's standards, rudimentary atomic weapons. And between the two of those bombings, that's like 200,000 people that were pretty much like killed in the most horrible way, right? That you could imagine. The things that we're dealing with in this period are very different. Nuclear weapons in general are measured in TNT equivalency. So you have... when you're talking about the biggest bombs, you're talking about megatons of TNT equivalency. So the biggest bomb that was ever tested, can you guess who tested the biggest nuclear bomb?
That was a Russian bomb called the Tsar Bomba.
You got that right. That is a 50. I don't know why I'm excited. I really shouldn't be excited about it. I was about to go into like a salesman
A really
pitch.
cheery description of the most horrible weapon ever invented.
Let me tell you about our new Tsar bomb. It's 50 megatons, baby. It's the biggest bomb that's ever been blown up anywhere. When they set off this bomb, they thought it might light the entire atmosphere on fire.
We name it after men we hate most.
Yeah, it is kind of weird that they did that.
Yeah.
It's a weird choice, yeah. That's true. Just to put this into perspective for you guys, though, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? This thing, the Tsar bomb, is more than 3,000 times as powerful as Fat Man and Little Boy, which were the bombs that were dropped on Japan, right? So
yeah.
we're talking about we're talking about the end of a nation. That's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about a type of warfare that you can't use. Essentially, right? It's so destructive. Yeah.
That's exactly it. The weapon that was invented that essentially negated itself. Basically, well, in a way it negated itself. I mean, it hasn't been used since the Second World War, and I don't expect it's ever going to be used. But at the same time, boy, howdy, does that threat sort of loom sometimes,
Always, man. And I think it's always in the back of everyone's head, and I think it creates kind of some type of weird psychological thing with everybody, but we don't really have time to get into that right now. But this is a phrase that came up I think this summarizes what you're talking about perfectly. The Cold War being a war of perceptions, right? So it's not really about who has the military superiority, who's going to win in the field. Like now it's about the perception of who would win, right? And the perception of who would win in a nuclear exchange, and the fact that now we have to make it believable, right? That we would actually use a nuclear weapon. That's kind of the way that warfare changes in this period, which is scary stuff.
Yeah, it definitely changes warfare into this kind of politically devolved, scattered thing where the kind of developed nations of the world brought their proxy wars all over the developing world and kind of chose to wreak all their havoc there instead. I mean, Vietnam is a good example of this.
Yeah, for sure. I shouldn't say there wasn't a ground war, because there obviously was, but you know what I mean.
Vietnam, Korea.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's just if you're counting the official ones. I mean, technically nothing happened in Cambodia and Laos, right?
Yeah, technically. But let's talk a little bit more about the Cuban Missile Crisis here in particular. The the warheads that were stored inside of Cuba. Basically, Cuba was afraid that the United States was going to, want regime change there, that they were going to remove Fidel Castro. And they had a really good reason to believe that, because the U.S. was pretty actively trying to kill Fidel Castro.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They had failed to do it at least once or twice by this point. I never really understood what was so threatening about Castro to them, but
well, having just like a socialist state so close to America, right?
Yeah.
And they had like a pro-U.S. Guy in power before, right? So
yeah, it was a big change for them.
Yeah, so there's this talk in the readings that I was doing about nuclear weapons being the currency of the Cold War, right? So basically, if you have them, you're a powerful state. If you don't have them, you're not, right? And you can literally, the leader of your country can be replaced overnight, or your country can just be taken over overnight, unless you have nuclear weapons, right? So in order for Cuba to, basically maintain their sovereignty, something that America apparently thinks is great, they had to get these, and I got a number of 170 nuclear warheads, which were inside of Cuba, right?
Yeah, and at the time, nuclear warheads had not gotten to the point where they had like super extended range yet, or at least not accurately or consistently.
Or the Soviets didn't have them. The United States
so
had
having them that
intercontinental,
close was a real problem.
Yeah, the United States had intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the Soviet Union was behind in that respect at this time. So
really,
yeah. So
how the hell were they ahead in space technology?
I don't know. We'll get into that later, I guess.
I thought those two things were kind of tied together.
They are tied together, but maybe it was just the ability of the U.S. to spend more. I don't know.
Well, that's a fair point.
But if I got that part wrong, then I'll come back and edit this, and no one will be any the wiser. But there's the idea of some of the stuff that Kennedy does here, right? To get back to Kennedy and his diplomatic prowess, I guess, whatever. Doing this quarantine thing rather than the blockade, right? And not being super strict about it. There were Soviet ships that he let through, and he let that couple of things slide that if he would have put his foot down on, we might have been dealing with like a nuclear exchange, right? There's even the shooting down of this U-2 spy plane. So the U.S. is sending spy planes over to take photos of these nuclear warhead sites, and one of them actually gets shot down. This guy, Rudolph Anderson, is killed. And that could have been the thing, right? There's a couple of moments that's like, oh man, this could be the one. And because Kennedy was able to, and this is all happening in secret, by the way. They're not like informing the public of any of this, at least not until later on, when a lot of the worst of it is over, maybe. The shooting down of that U-2 spy plane, and Kennedy being able to look past that and not starting the war over that thing.
Over that, yeah.
Yeah. And the way that it actually ends up, Khrushchev has this very famous phrase that the two of them are pulling on ends of a rope, right? Just like tying that knot tighter and tighter. And at a certain point, there's no going back from it. But luckily, they do, through like some serious diplomacy, they're able to work things out. And you mentioned these telegrams or whatever, right? That two messages in particular.
Yeah. So. There's a documentary by Errol Morris called The Fog of War, and in it they interview Robert S. McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense under Kennedy. And he says that on the critical Saturday, October 27th, we had two Khrushchev messages in front of us. One had come in Friday night, and it had been dictated by a man who was either drunk or under tremendous stress. Basically, he said, if you'll guarantee you won't invade Cuba, we'll take the missiles out. Then, before we could respond, we had a second message that had been dictated by a bunch of hardliners. Mm-hmm. And it said, in effect, if you attack, we're prepared to confront you with masses of military power. Now, what he said was, more specifically, we and you ought not to pull on the ends of a rope, in which you have tied the knots of war. Because the more the two of us pull, the tighter the knot will be tied. And then it will be necessary to cut that knot. And what that would mean is not for me to explain to you. I have participated in 2 wars, and know that war does not end until it has run through cities, killing people and destroying. And it goes on like that sort of thing. It was a very, again, this is the most tense period of this whole point. And I guess as a president, you have a choice in front of you. Do you choose to answer one message and not another? And which?
Yeah, it's gotta be scary, man.
The point here is understanding what the other person wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to put yourself in their shoes, because in the room that day was a former, or actually either former or current ambassador to this to Russia. So there we go. This is actually from a recorded taped conversation, October 27th, 1962. Kennedy says, "We're not going to get these missiles out of Cuba, probably anyway by negotiation." And Tommy Thompson, who had been the ambassador to Russia, said, "I don't agree, Mr. President. I think there's still a chance." And Kennedy said that he'll back down. And Thompson said, "Well, the important thing for Khrushchev, it seems to me, is to be able to say, I saved Cuba and I stopped an invasion."
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, in Thompson's mind was the idea that, if we offer him an out that makes him look good, he'll take it. And that was also Kennedy's out to not pick a fight here if he didn't want to, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that the ability to empathize with the person that he was dealing with, and B, the ability to listen to the people around him, was part of what got them through here.
For sure. There's in my reading here, I found a very interesting point. Basically, something that Kennedy understood because of his experience, but also just because he was a student of history, right? He obviously he lived through World War II. He fought in World War II. He also read a lot about World War I, and he just had a great understanding of just the nature of warfare, and the fact that war doesn't always break out because of just straightforward aggression, right? The way that it did with the Nazis, right? Where just a country is just invading countries because they want more land. What is far more common in history, and Kennedy understood this very well, is that war breaks out because of a misunderstanding, because of human error, because of, like I talked about earlier, these things in the bureaucracy that get rolling and you can't stop them, right? These knots that are tied tighter and tighter. And Kennedy, as you were saying, the ability to empathize with the other side, not just view them as, bloodthirsty, trying to kill everybody, and actually understanding their point of view and being willing to work with them. So what actually comes out of this at the end of the day? Like what is the actual solution to this?
Well, we're all still here. But in the end, I think Khrushchev was offered that out, and they took it. I believe the United States ended up removing some missiles that they had
in Turkey, and I think Italy as well. I think there's an Italy thing. It's less talked about, but
I didn't know that one. But yeah, Turkey's the one that you hear.
Yeah, so it's essentially a trade. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a compromise that allowed everybody to get what they want. In this case,
there is kind of a funny thing where U.S. is like, "Oh, you got to take these nuclear warheads out of Cuba," and then Cuba will say, "Well, these aren't offensive; these are defensive, right?" And then they look at the ones in Turkey, and the U.S. says, "Oh, these aren't offensive; these are defensive nuclear warheads," right? Just kind of the hypocrisy there, and acknowledging that, and actually removing those nukes, which were similarly, threatening to Russia.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, it's interesting as a compromise because America had other missiles with which they could strike Russia at the time.
Oh, for sure.
It was a compromise that got some missiles off their doorstep, but it definitely didn't remove them from harm's way, you know?
Oh yeah, there's the Cold War is definitely still going on after this period, but we do have a limited test ban treaty. So there's going to be less testing of nuclear weapons. I think they have to test them underground, or there's something like that.
Yes, they had to stop testing them in the atmosphere and underwater, which I feel like should have been like stupid obvious right from the beginning. But like, you know, I guess the ball rolling and the wheels of bureaucracy and stuff like that.
Seems like testing them underground might not be that great either.
So I guess I could understand that, but I think being underground would contain radiation. And if I understand right, like, the combined weight of the ground around the explosion shouldn't make it that big a deal as long as you do it right. I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but
yeah, it just kind of feels like you might like.
So I'm just gonna say that blowing up nukes is bad. Period. Why don't we go there? It's just not a good idea. Splitting atoms is dangerous.
It's not
dangerous.
The
monkeys,
thing.
Very bad.
Yeah, for sure. It is dangerous to be in our hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
The proverbial monkeys that you're talking about. And there's also, out of this comes the Soviet hotline, right? Like we talked about these miscommunications or these differing kind of communications covering and the confusion of that. After this, Kennedy installs a direct line. He can talk to Khrushchev when he needs to.
I like what the Soviet hotline is. It just sounds so much like more inherently sexy when you say the Soviet hotline. Like it sounds like a phone number that you could call in the 60s to speak to hot Russian dominatrixes and stuff.
Da, baby. Call the Soviet hotline tonight. in Soviet Russia phone
hotline has you.
Oh, we do it at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
Okay, so last thing that I want to talk about here, and then we'll just sum things up. Of course, one of the most important things that you need to talk about when you're talking about Kennedy, when you're talking about the Cold War, is the situation in Vietnam. At this point, things are kind of escalating. With North Vietnam becoming communist and the fear of all of Vietnam becoming communist and kind of the ripple effect of that. We talked about it a little bit in the last episode. But in terms of like Kennedy's legacy, I do want to just, speak more directly to that. And one of the biggest things, I don't like to deal in a lot of historical counterfactuals either, Deven, but I do think that one of the things that people say about Kennedy is had he not been assassinated, there would have been no escalation in Vietnam. Would you care to discuss that?
Knowing Kennedy like I know him, I think that there wouldn't have been unilateral escalation of Vietnam.
Yeah.
I think that Kennedy may have been willing to escalate Vietnam as part of a larger coalition, but not as a single nation.
Yeah. In reading about it, I found that he was very apprehensive to commit any troops to Vietnam. He didn't want ground troops in Vietnam. That was kind of a line in the sand for him. A lot of what he was willing to do was, advisors, sending money so that the South Vietnamese could arm themselves, money for arms, for more guns, more tanks, helicopters, things of that nature. And, just being aware of history, as I said, he was very much aware that the French had gone through a similar thing trying to keep control of Vietnam. He actually talks about, in reference to Vietnam specifically, he talks about things like the Boer War and obviously the Korean War and this idea that, you don't just drop, 20,000 soldiers in a place and then you take out the leader, change the government and leave. Everybody always thinks that when they're going to war, but then you immediately get bogged down. Right. And it actually spins out going to this thing that we talked about at the beginning. Right. This idea that there's unintended consequences to any type of foreign intervention.
Yeah. And you can never really anticipate all the outcomes of a decision that you might make.
Exactly. Yeah. A phrase
some might be clear. Right. If I drop my glass, it's going to break, whatever. Yeah. But then sometimes you don't know how people are going to interpret things.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase, you because of the nature of like history, you don't know what good news is.
Yeah.
So you think that you do, right? But ultimately, you truly don't. It's hard to say how things are going to spin, but I think it's pretty reasonable to say if you looking at history itself, this idea of a short war and an invasion, we're going to have regime change, and then we're just going to leave. Like
Never. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan.
I was going to say, look at Iraq and Afghanistan. That's probably one of the best examples, and this is something that it's such a situation that's evolving right now, so we can't really draw too many conclusions. But you might be able to say the same thing about Putin's current situation, right? That maybe he thought that was going to be simpler than it turns out to be, right?
Yeah, but then he seems to keep doubling down as things keep going not so great. Although, so I guess in the West we would consider them to be not so great, but I'm not sure Putin's concerned with the amount of lives he expends achieving his aims.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah, something that Kennedy was a lot more worried about as a person, I think, was like, getting everybody killed. And just like, as someone who did live through World War II, I think that Kennedy wanted a better future for us.
I'm sure he clearly understood what the consequences of a wider conflict could be, right?
Yeah, he had seen that the story of humanity up to a certain point, we've been killing each other, and with World War II, that really escalated, and he wanted a different world, I think. Yeah,
I think that maybe he wanted to deliver better. You know what I mean? I feel like Kennedy felt like, and I mean, this is kind of speculation about him as a person, but I feel like he felt like if he was going to be the president, then America deserved a certain level of what he was capable of, right? That he couldn't half-ass anything, and that he had to do it with the right intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that he was going to devote himself to it well and properly.
He truly did, yeah. I don't know. I don't have stats on this of which presidents took time off to go golfing the least, but I would guess that.
I would guess probably not him.
Yeah, probably not.
Or rather, he rather probably took some of the least time off. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to look up. But he was definitely someone who was dedicated to the presidency. Honestly, thought that he should be the president, thought that he was the best guy for the job, and he put his whole self into it. Definitely, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no classified documents in Mar-a-Lago for this guy.
Yeah, there are a lot of classified documents surrounding Mr. Kennedy, but...
Oh, it's just not in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah. Something that's not classified, though, is the second photo of the episode. It's a photo of the episode segment. Okay, we're talking about Kennedy's favorite photo of himself. If you want to see this photo, you can see it on our Instagram, but you can also just Google Kennedy's favorite photo of himself. It was shot by a photographer, Mark Shaw, who was not a political photographer. Mostly he would photograph celebrities and shit like that. And the Kennedy family actually hired him to take some family portraits of them kind of on vacation. I think this was when Kennedy first became president, or maybe right before taking the presidency. Don't quote me on that. But there's some pretty cool photos here in the set, and the one that we want to talk about the most, I think, although we can talk about some of the other ones, is like I said, what Kennedy calls his favorite photo of himself. Can you describe the photo that I'm referencing?
I'm looking at it right now. So you see Kennedy walking onto a sand path.
Yeah.
At the end of what looks to be a lawn. And the work by the photographer is incredible. He has the camera set so that the tall grass that's in the foreground is very, very clear, but that everything else in the background becomes very, very blended and kind of blurry. And Kennedy being in almost nearly the center of the shot is also very clear. He has his back turned to the camera. He has his left arm, I think, in his pocket, in his jacket, is slung over it, and he's got his head turned to the right over his shoulder, and he's looking over the field. I think it's interesting to say that Kennedy's favorite photo of himself doesn't have his face.
Yeah, very interesting, man.
If anything, the thing at the center of the photo is his butt.
Yeah. It's a very, very butt-focused photo. You see a man who's very thoughtful here. I really love I didn't really take this in myself, but I really do love what you said about how the foreground is all in focus and it's all,
very clear.
It's all fully rendered, and then the stuff in the back is unknown. I think that is kind of a weird analogy for his presidency. He's this lonely figure in this photo. He's the only person in the photo, even though his family is probably, right behind the camera here. Mm-hmm. It says a lot about the man himself, and a lot about what he wanted to accomplish as a president, and a lot about his own ambition, like what it was. If you're going to go into all these things and all of these political situations and these wars, what is the point at the end of the day? And I think Kennedy understood that like a normal life with your family is kind of what you're fighting for, right? If
that's
that makes
interesting
sense.
Because I don't think that was exactly something that Kennedy quite got at home, being a very, very kind of privileged person, and his father being who he was. Yeah. And like, I'm sure that probably you would hear his kids say that certainly they didn't get like a normal life at home all the time, like you'd hope that that's what everybody can fight for. But the truth is that in the cases like these, oftentimes somebody has to sacrifice for the president to be able to spend so much time being the president.
Yeah, for sure. He was someone who sacrificed himself, and I think that's why his legacy is so enduring. I do think that I'm not even someone who thinks that the U.S. is a great country. I kind of think it's crap. I don't get romantic about the idea of U.S. presidents in any way. But if you look at Kennedy himself, like he's an incredibly inspiring person, and I think that maybe. I do believe he was one of the best presidents, if not one of the best leaders that the world has ever seen. Partially because of his ability to inspire people, and just the forward thinking that he had. It almost feels like he was concerned about us, like literally us in the present now. Like he wanted a better world for us, which there's not many people who you can say that about.
It'd be nice to think about. It is nice to think about that may have really been what drove him. And like, I believe that too. And I think that that's super rare, which is why I believe it cautiously. Mm-hmm. They say never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'm in your camp. I'm kind of a fan of Kennedy. I feel like we've kind of been kind of sitting around singing his praises this episode. Yeah, so I mean, when I look at this picture, I see it kind of as an allegory for the lonely road that presidency is. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I mean, this path that he's on is kind of really short.
Yeah.
Wow. There's sort of an allegory for his presidency there. And something about the casual nature of the man. You know what I mean? Like, most photos of most presidents are, standing, their portrait style, standing, shoulders square, their pictures, right? This is just a shot of him walking with his jacket over his arm. It's very candid. It's almost unrehearsed,
It's human in a way that, a lot of politicians, I feel like they want to be viewed as, the gray suit, the just part of the machine, right? Like Big Brother, whatever you want to call it. And Kennedy, he is in a different position. Like I said, he's more of a human being, and more of a representative of the people. And even if the tides of bureaucracy and the tides of history were going in one direction, he wasn't afraid to push against the tides, right?
Yeah. And I think that's very much, I think probably part of why there's so much conspiracy theory surrounding his death.
Perfect segue. So we're gonna call the episode here, guys. It's been kind of a long one, but a lot to get into, and I hope that you guys really enjoyed it. we will come back. We will do at least one more of these. We're going to talk about the assassination, and we're going to get into some of the conspiracy theories surrounding this as well. So
this has been fun.
It has been really fun. I've learned so much in the last few weeks researching this. You know, as I said, it's one of those topics where you kind of say, oh yeah, I know this shit. But once you start to read it, there's so many different things going on. And just, yeah, I think I just understand the world a lot better now that I've done this research. So thanks for going down this path with us so far, listeners. Thanks, Deven, for your contributions as always.
Thanks for including me.
Yeah, no worries. Where can people find you on the internet?
Right now...
You're taking a break.
Yeah, right now I'm taking a break from the internet,
Cool.
So there's really nowhere to find me, but I'll be back soon with things and stuff.
Yeah,
and
even podcast-related stuff, perhaps?
Yeah, podcast-related stuff, perhaps. But for now, just, anticipate my arrival.
Cool.
Yeah.
There's reviews that you can leave. You can leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. You can leave reviews on Spotify. You can tell your friends about the podcast. Deven, where else can people find this podcast?
What did we say? We said Spotify. We said YouTube, Apple Podcast. I think that covers it, doesn't it?
Instagram. Got an Instagram.
Instagram, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Photo_friends_pod. That's where you're going to find the photos related to this episode, which, we kept it pretty photo related, Deven. I'm pretty proud of us.
Yeah, I mean, the Kennedy Khrushchev photo kept us going for a really long time.
For sure. Yeah, that's great. You can also check us out on Patreon, and you can check out our sponsor, CloudSpot. And that's about all I've got for the episode. Deven, do you have something random for the people?
Something random. So actually, fun fact, in the late 1800s Victorian era, there became sort of a minor fad for nipple rings. So sometimes when you're looking at pictures of fancy people from the 1800s, some of them actually have nipple rings under there. Keep that in mind.